Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this particular video, I'm going to be talking about the period from the 15th of November through to the 30th of November, which is one of the most spectacular periods astrology-wise in the year. So lots of particular things to talk about. There's also, of course, I'm going to make a focal point of the new moon in Scorpio, which takes place on the 20th of November. And when we talk about new moons and full moons, we think about that cycle that happens every month. We get a new moon and a full moon every month, but they're often in different signs. Well, yes, they always are. But when we think about another new moon, full moon cycle, we're talking about the new moon in one particular sign and the full moon in that sign again. And that's about 6 months later. So a lot of the things that are happening around the new moon, and we're thinking here about the 20th of November, are about new beginnings or about new chapters opening. And those chapters will have their completion date in the May. Now, having said the completion date, let's think maybe you start a relationship around this time. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to end on May the 1st, 2026, but it will be an important junction. Around that time, you're going to be assessing where you've come. And sometimes you reach that point and you think, we've come a long way. Isn't this fantastic? Let's, build on what we've already established. Whereas occasionally you'll come along after 6 months and think, you know what, I'm done with this. And this applies to projects, it applies to courses even, all sorts of things can have a 6-month life. And I also think, especially with this new moon, that there is an important junction coming up in mid-February. So that will be another point at which we're going to be looking at events that happen around this time, both in your own life and generally what's going on in the world. And we're going to look at what happens to those events in and around the 15th, 16th, and 17th of February. And I'll explain why we're doing that shortly. Before, just a couple of very quick notices. If you're new to my channel, please press subscribe. It helps the channel to grow. And the other thing is that I noticed that I'm nearly at the end of the first building blocks course of my astrology course. And I thought that those of you who maybe have quite a knowledge of astrology already, you've done the basics, might want to expand your knowledge a bit. The next part of the course is going to begin on the 17th of January, and it's really going to be all about prediction. We're going to be looking at progressions, secondary progressions, perfections, annual perfections. We're going to be looking at a lot of things that sort of help astrologers know how to judge what's coming up. So if you would be interested in doing that part of the course or the next 2 parts of the whole course, then you can find information in the description box underneath here, or you can just head straight to my website, astrolutely.com, where you'll get even more information. Okay, so without further ado, let's set about looking at this period of time. Now, I think one of the things I'm going to do before we even start is to show you what this period of time looks like in terms of the astrology. So here's the chart of our new moon. And as you can see, there's various kind of lines drawn in the center of the circle, and they're producing a shape. And down the side there, if you can look carefully, you'll see that I've written dates, the 17th, 19th, and so on, which are the dates when aspects, that means the angles between the planets, become exact. Now, I think you can see straight off the bat, as we look at this, there is a 6-pointed star. Now, we've seen one of those earlier this year. In fact, we saw one around about October the 5th. It was quite interesting. And I pointed out then, yes, the 6-pointed star is also the Star of David. And guess what? There was a major, major development around that time with the program for peace, as it was called, such as it is, was established at that time. I'm making no comments on that. That's just what happened. That's historically correct. And whether you know what you think about it is entirely your own thoughts. I'm not making any comments on it other than to say that it's quite interesting that we saw this patterning coming through. Now, if you're really kind of on the ball, you may start picking up your rulers and having a look and say, well, it's not quite as even as I'd like it to be. Yeah, you are probably right, but it makes virtually no difference, because what we're looking at is Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune and Saturn, Pluto, and the sun and moon all resonating on at the same pitch. In other words, this is why we have degrees in astrology. Each sign is made up of 30 degrees. This is how we locate the planets, where they are in terms of as they orbit the sun. It's like saying, oh, it's on the M5 and putting a postcode in. You know, well, we know where that place is. And it's the same really with the planets. We have to have a location, and location is made up of degree areas of the different signs of the zodiac. So when you get a whole lot of planets resonating at the same pitch, you've got something going on. And we can really talk about an intensity of effect. And one of the things that I think you would agree with me about when we look at 2025, it has been an extraordinary year. So much has gone on, so much has happened all at the same time, everything, everywhere. We've had stuff going on in terms of the world with great world breakthroughs. We've had huge upsets. We've had scandals. We've had all sorts of things. And this kind of intense pattern where everything is sort of accelerated in time, and we're noticing things we haven't noticed before. And you know, I talked about three-eye atlas in my previous new moon video. If you'd like to go there and have a little look at it. And I'm saying, you know, whether or not it has any great meaning for us in terms of what it may be, the point is that we've noticed this new object swanning into our solar system. That means we're being awakened to something we've never seen before. And, you know, that in and of itself is a sort of a statement about what we're living through at the moment. They're both exciting times. They're also a little bit scary when we don't really know the meaning of anything. But when we look at this constellation of influences all resonating at the same pitch, we have to know that this period of time is going to be very, very significant. Now, the other thing I want to point out about this, which is something that might be slightly on the technical side here, but if we can go with the idea that when planets have got the same number of degrees beside them, they are all resonating with each other, there's a step we can take this a little bit further, in particular in regard to Uranus, Pluto, Saturn, and Neptune, because Uranus is hovering around 29.01 degrees of Gemini, and Pluto is at 1 degree of Aquarius. The Saturn and Neptune are hovering near 1 degree of Aries. What you've got when you look at the zodiac sequence is Saturn and Neptune at the midpoint of the Uranus-Pluto combo. So this is one of the things that I talk about a lot, in the sense of, when did we see this going on before? Well, nothing is exactly quite the same, but we have most certainly had Uranus, Pluto, and Neptune in a kind of tripartite relationship. And this we saw back in 1945. So one of the things we're looking at the moment really is any coincidences, any resonances, any echoes from that period of time. And I think there are plenty. And we have to remember that this particular patterning is going to go on into 2026 as well, with that all-important Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And we saw we've seen a lot in the past in the sense of the end of the regimes and the beginnings of new ones, whether that comes about through the death of a ruler and the arrival of a new one, or whether there's a revolution or a coup and a whole regime comes to an end and a new kind of leader emerges. So we've got that pattern going on. And what's really quite interesting, if we go back to 1945 and beyond, a lot of things around that period of time, the World War ended, so there was a lot of reformation, a good Pluto word, to do with territory, whether it was Pakistan and India, whether it was North and South Korea. I mean, it went on for a while. It didn't all happen on one day. But this is one of the things we're looking at happening at this time as well, and going through to 2026, is that we are seeing a lot of reformation. So that not only in terms of leaders and political movements and swings to the right or swings to the left, and let's not forget that the stronger movement is towards far right rather than far left. But, we're also seeing things about the land. When we think about Ukraine and Russia, Russia wanted to reclaim its land, Ukraine wanting to retain its sovereignty. And we look at it happening the same with Israel and Gaza. So there's reformation going on. There is all of that happening. And there is very, very clearly an echo of the mid to late 1940s with this period of time. It's both very destructive and in some ways, but it's also a profound time of development and evolution. And I'm happy to look at that, think of it that way when I'm looking at this particular star pattern. So let's go a little further into day by day, sort of, through this period from the 17th of November through to the end. And what we find, as you see as I'll go through these, the sun and the moon are at the 7 o'clock position in this chart. So they are in the 3rd house, astrologically, 28 degrees of Scorpio and 12 minutes. And on the 17th, we've got the sun trining Jupiter and trining Saturn. In other words, this is our first grand trine. And it's this grand trine and the relationship between the sun, Pluto, Neptune, and Saturn that makes our first strong configuration, which is a kite. Now, I've talked about this in the past, and I'm mentioning it again. There are actually 3 kites in this particular configuration here. This is the first one. And we think about how harmonious are the sun, Neptune, and Jupiter. And that is also going to be repeated, Sun, Saturn, sort of Neptune and Jupiter. We're going to see that repeated with Venus a little in about 10 days after this point. So we could say that good things emerge from the formation of a kite. Progress is made. There is a sense of consensus around, and as I said, good things coming out of developments, events, and actions. But what holds that kite together is, in this case, the Jupiter-Pluto opposition. So we see Pluto at 1 degree of Aquarius in the 5 o'clock position, and Jupiter at 25 degrees of Cancer in the 11 o'clock position. Now, I've had people say in my comments, this isn't a trine or it's not an opposition because you've got one planet in one sign and another planet in another sign. But it's all about the degrees. So 25 degrees to 1 degree of the next sign is only 6 degrees away. So that's very much an opposition. That's not even a wide opposition. It is an opposition. So it is this Jupiter-Pluto opposition, which is an aspect of tension. And with tension, we create friction. And with friction, we get sparks. It is this Jupiter-Pluto opposition that is holding the whole of this kite configuration together. And Jupiter and Pluto have an awful lot to do with power. They have a lot to do with mass events. So we could look at things like this and attach it to the idea of all the No Kings protests that have occurred in America. That fits the idea of tension, but with the idea of a great cause behind it. What happens as the outcome, we have to wait and see. But anyway, that's very much what I'm looking at here, the idea of mass movement. Now, the Jupiter-Pluto opposition will not be exact until July the 20th next year. But at the moment, it's within orb. We're 6 degrees, it's happening. And this is why there's a lot of mass protests, a lot of mass events that carry a lot of weight, and in the process change opinions and change law. All that kind of thing is going on. I do think this has a lot to do with the economy, the global economy, the national economy, and it remains to be seen just what developments there are around this time of the, let's say, give it a wide berth, 17th to about the 30th of November, whether there are any really big developments economically. As we know, the markets, stock markets have been very good in America, for instance, even though all the rest of it, really, people don't feel as though they've got any money. And of course, there's been a lot of shutdowns and a lot of problems with, I was going to say food stamps, but it's really more vouchers. A lot of things people are definitely not feeling the economy is good. Now, eventually, that will have to crack, because you can't have that ridiculous anomaly going on with the markets being booming away and in reality people feeling impoverished. So that's going to snap at some time. It's probably going to snap, maybe it'll wait as long as mid-July next year, but it's getting pretty damn near it when we're in November. In a personal sense, when we think about Sun trine Jupiter, Sun trine Saturn, we think about things that you want to build in your life, that you want to grow, you want to establish yourself, you want to establish something. That nice little triangle there is a very good one for that. But notice also that Mercury is retrograding in sextile to Pluto. And we've already had other influences. I'm going to come to Mercury shortly. And so whenever Mercury is retrograde, it's going to come back to the same position. And when we put Mercury and Pluto together, regardless of whether they're square, opposition, sextile, or trine, you've got dark deeds, dark thoughts, you've got corruption, you've got things going on in secret places. And at the edge of all of this is the idea of power. So just bear that in mind without thinking that you can point a finger at something. If we look on the 19th, Mercury is opposing Uranus, while Mercury is also trining Neptune. And this is, again, why we have such an interesting and powerful time, because of the way everything is vibrating on the same pitch. Mercury opposed Uranus round about the 29th of October. So there is a reference to that point. And one of the first things I want to talk about in that regard, from the 29th of October, 1st of November, this is when in England, the palace, Buckingham Palace, announced the withdrawal and removal of all of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's titles, honors, and not only that, but he's to move from Royal Lodge and out to the wilderness of Sandringham. And in point of fact, Sandringham is absolutely beautiful. So I think anyone would mind living in Sandringham. But anyway, in terms of what's going on in Andrew's life, this is absolutely traumatic. And the second person that this is affecting is, of course, his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson. No titles, nowhere to live, although technically, of course, she has somewhere to live. But these two were really caught up in the focus of a lot of discussion about the monarchy and about the future at this time. So it'd be very interesting to see that if, again, all of this comes back into the center of news, if you like, on and around the 19th. And I would suggest, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's very, very soon, it can be as we go through to next year even, that, there will be more to come out from Andrew's relationship, and in fact, Sarah's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and other people's. That has yet to come out. So there is more, and who knows, maybe around the 19th, we'll get a little more of an inkling about what that will be. Now, the 20th, we've got our new moon. And if we look at that new moon at 28 degrees of Scorpio, if we go to the very, very opposite point, which of course is another strut in another kite configuration, and this one, the sun is trine, Jupiter is trine Neptune, but the opposition holding it all together, being the angle of tension, is the sun and moon opposing Uranus. Uranus is the great groundbreaker. Now, you can think about Uranus in the sense of an earthquake. You can see how that would break the ground, how everything tumbles apart. Uranus has another very popular symbol that some of you may be, already familiar with, which is the idea of the tower in the tarot pack. So we have this idea of something falling, there's lightning going on, and Uranus is really like lightning, like ball lightning. It's very alarming, but at the same time very energetic, which is interesting. Uranus is the planet that breaks convention. So we have all sorts of things breaking the rules at this time, and breaking with the way we've always thought about things. So conventions are broken with Uranus. And so we can see this going on in our own lives. We may respond to this Sun-Uranus opposition and think, why am I doing this? Why am I mindlessly doing this? Why? I'm not going to do it anymore. So we've got our own rules we can break, but there's also the chance we might go through a red light, which is not a good plan. Or we might do something else that kind of sets the cat amongst the pigeons. That's the nature of a sun-moon opposing Uranus. Now, if you want to come back to me again just shortly, there's another significance in this new moon. It happens at 28 degrees of Scorpio. And from this point on, right through until April, really, every new moon will be at 28 degrees of a sign. Now, that could just be a matter of, oh, how interesting, it's nothing important. But the thing is, because of Uranus's position, and it's not moving very far away from 29.1 back to 28.7, it's not moving very far away from each new moon. So every single new moon is going to have some kind of angle or aspect to Uranus, which is what makes it interesting. And the suggestion here is that this is the first one we have. And in a way, there was one a little bit closer than this, but I'm not going to get into that right now. I want to talk about this new moon in Scorpio, which is almost exactly opposition Uranus. Then we can maybe even connect the dots from this point in time to when we come to the April, really, of next year. But if you were listening early on when I talked about things that you're setting in motion right now, they have a 6-month timeline, and they also have a 3-month timeline. And this is very much in connection with this 28 degrees of the signs, because what's going to happen in 3 months' time on February the 17th is a solar eclipse at 28 degrees of Aquarius. So we are 3 months away from an eclipse. And if you remember, we're talking in reference to the royal family here in Great Britain, that huge solar eclipse, which definitely was part of the beginnings of all the things that happened to do with Andrew and the questioning of the royal family. All sorts of very big and important things started to happen. Well, we're going to see some even bigger and more important, I would say, developments in the February time. So I wanted to really make sure that I mentioned that. I also think that it's significant that America's natal moon is 27 degrees of Aquarius, so that new moon coming up on the 17th of February is going to fall on America's new moon. So I think look carefully at events at this particular time as we look at the 20th of November and this half the months of November, because it's not just on that day, we're looking at that stretch of time. But I think things that are being discussed about the Trump administration, about Trump himself, I think we're going to look carefully at those events because they are precursors, or they are events that are happening of which behind them is something much greater. But I think whatever is stirring in the Trump administration, or with Donald Trump in particular, we're going to have a denouement or something much more powerful by the time we come to the middle of February. So again, I'm not going to make any false predictions, although in my Friday bite of the 31st of October, I did sort of mention that it appeared to me that things were sort of getting out of control with this administration. And once you've got a lot of institutions, falling apart, a lot of people no longer in their jobs, you've got a lot of upset going on with the people of a nation as well. It's unsustainable after a while. And that, unless things change within the administration, it is heading for some kind of collapse. And so maybe that's what I'm referring to when we look at this period of the 20th of November, 15th to the 30th, and then we look at February of next year. So I think that's really important. Anyway, let's come back and have a look at the map again, and I'll take you down a little bit further. As you can see, on the 21st itself, we've got the sun opposing Uranus, but it's already in opposition. We allow in astrology 8 degrees of what we call awe between a planet, between an aspect that is exact and when it's drawing towards it or separating. So we can sort of look at 8 days here, 8 days before and 8 days after. The sun will still be in range of Uranus. And we know from looking at the 19th that Mercury has gone back to oppose Uranus just literally the day before. And as we go a little bit further forward in time to the 30th of November, Venus will oppose Uranus. And if we look at the 7 o'clock position in the chart, you'll see the symbol for Venus, the sun, the moon, and Mercury and Mars. They've all been quite close together, all these personal planets, jammed up against each other, all trundling around the zodiac in pretty well the same space. They're all putting a lot of pressure on these much bigger influences, Pluto, Jupiter, Uranus, Saturn, and Neptune. And that's going to happen increasingly as we go through the next weeks and months, especially as we get to January, the end of January, and we have a constellation in Aquarius with Pluto that again is going to be phenomenal. We're going to see a lot of big, blast-worthy, can you have such a word, developments at that time. On the 22nd of November, the sun enters Sagittarius. So we're around about Thanksgiving time. And I'm sorry, I didn't bother to check exactly when Thanksgiving is happening. But this time, Thanksgiving is happening on a retrograde Mercury. So everything to do with travel is going to be a little bit more complicated. So if you're heading off for Thanksgiving, don't leave anything to the last minute. And because Uranus is involved, we've got a lot of things to do with technology, whether that's phones, whether it's cyber attacks, whether it's just power outages or issues with technology, that can slow you down as well. So always have backup plans, back up your files, don't leave anything so that it makes you vulnerable and you're without information. That's a really important piece of advice for this second half of November. The sun, as it enters Sagittarius on the 22nd, Mercury will be trining that Saturn and Jupiter, which I've talked about before. It's a very nice set of angles and could be a good time to set something in cement, especially if that something is going to make a big difference, or it's it's out of your comfort zone. There's something non-ordinary about it, and that's because we have to embrace that Uranus factor. If we then come to the 23rd, the sun, which has been trine Pluto early on, is now sextiling Pluto. Then on the 26th, we have Venus in the same place as the sun, trining Jupiter, trining Saturn. 2 days later, Saturn stationary direct. Now, again, let's have a look at this whole business of retrograde and direct. When a planet is retrograde, it doesn't change its nature. Saturn is Saturn, whether it's heading backwards, forwards, it's north of its declination, or whatever it is, it's always the same. It hasn't changed its nature. But we get a different view of it. Saturn presents, or whichever planet we're looking at, stationary, direct. It's changing. It's allowing us to look at it in a different way. So for the past 5 months or so, a lot of Pisceans in particular, who were born in March, have been under a retrograde Saturn and may have found that things were really, they were up against it. It just felt heavy. And maybe you did have some real struggles at that time. So technically, from the point that Saturn turns direct, things should technically get a little easier. And if Saturn is somewhere in your natal chart, it's sitting on your moon or wherever it may be, we can see that the pressure is now changing. Things are moving in a slightly different direction and things may start to get easier. But notice that word may start to get easier is very important, because Saturn is still a planet through which we learn or have some of life's hardest lessons. And that's not going to change. Although with Saturn comes maturity and comes grace in some ways, as we see often if we live to be old enough, how often we have these great figures of age who are very wise and who we look to give us a sense of security, stability, and knowledge. And I'm thinking here of people like David Attenborough, the naturalist, really, and how amazing his research and his tales and his journeys into the animal kingdom have been so marvelous and elevating for all of us. And he's just as lively as he was 50 years ago. But how important these figures are. And he is representing Saturn in its greatest aspect. And we need to look at that, as well as the fact that Saturn always comes and raps us on the knuckles. And really, in light of what I'm talking about here with Uranus, if you remember, I said it's good to break some of your own rules. It's good to say, you know what, I've done this mindlessly for goodness knows how long, and I'm not going to do it anymore. That's good. But it's not good to run a red light. And I think we get that same thing with Saturn, that the idea that we want to move forward, we want to accept change, and we want to do new things. But at the same time, there's accountability. And I'm going to come to that at the end of this particular video, that word accountability. So as Saturn is stationary, it is all-powerful. The planet becomes more intense when it's stationary. We know that also in this period, a lot of things that reflect the establishment, the established view, the things that run organizations, countries, nations, the world order. This is a very, very important period as Saturn moves. Saturn is stationary, preparing to move direct. So we may see quite a lot of saber rattling from, let's say, someone like Putin, also very big and important developments that show that something is really shifting in this regard. On the 29th, Mercury turns direct. And although, it can be a nuisance, Mercury retrograde, I think if we're prepared to make a few journeys back in time, we're prepared to reflect on things that have happened and maybe think of, how we could have done things differently, reconnecting with people we haven't seen for a long time. We put a retrograde Mercury to good use, as well as obviously occasionally being tripped up by it, by being delayed or having things cancelled or postponed. But as Mercury goes direct, we start to think, okay, things can be a little bit more straightforward. And maybe from this point, a lot of the things that have been very mysterious or very volatile will start to be able to make some sense out of. And last but not least, on the 30th of November, Venus does the same as the Sun. It's the same as Mercury and the Moon and Mars before it. Venus opposes Uranus. And again, looking at that pattern and looking at that little cluster of personal planets taking a part in this big arrangement with all the slower moving planets, my goodness, I haven't seen anything like this for a very, very long time. And so in your own life, you may be saying that about the things that happen to you, that everything that's going on, you've never seen anything like it. But again, we may be seeing that or saying that really about the world as well. The things that we're seeing in the world, we've never seen anything like this before. I shall, of course, be talking next year a little bit more about, we'll be a new year and we'll be looking at the developments of, how the big planets are forming and what it means as patterning for 2026. But I think, just to give you a little heads up right now, that really ever since 2020, things changed radically with COVID and all the things that have followed on from that. We are now right in the thick of it. This 10-year period, 2020 to 2030, is going to change the shape of things. And we're never going back. We're never going back to what life was like before 2020. But as we go through each year, coming up to 2030, we're facing challenges, but we're also facing enormous growth, enormous change in our awareness. And with change in awareness, we talk about a change in consciousness. But in point of fact, that means when we're conscious of things, we expand our awareness and our ability to really be who we are and to shape the world we live in. I think all of this is extremely important to bear in mind. And it brings me back to the last point, really, that I want to make in my conclusion. And this came about recently. I was being interviewed by somebody, and I don't always like having questions thrown at me that I haven't really thought about. And the questions thrown about me, what would you say about 2026 in a word? And I thought about it and I thought, well, atonement. Now, close to atonement is accountability. They're not exactly the same, but they belong to the same stream of thought. And this has been something that has been going on since Saturn was in Pisces, and especially since Saturn and Neptune have been so close together in Pisces. And we've seen it with famous figures falling off their perch, being caught doing something. Well, Andrew, Mountbatten Windsor, look how the mighty are fallen off that perch, no longer considered a royal in terms of his titles and honors and all of that, stripped of all of them. So we've seen a lot of that, really. That's probably quite extreme, but we've seen it in with various celebrities and various leaders. This has happened to. And that's going to continue on through 2026 as well. And the point I want to make is that this is something we can all share in a way. And that's the idea of being accountable. And again, I think I've mentioned this before, the idea of the 12-step program. One of the steps that's in that program is that you have to apologize, take accountability for the things that you've done that have damaged other people, affected their lives by your behavior. And while I'm not suggesting that it's a good plan for all of us to go through a list of all the bad things we've done in our lives, because I assure you, we've all done bad things. Maybe we are prompted enough to go see that person or whatever is appropriate and actually fall on our knees, as opposed to falling on our swords, falling on our knees. But I think the important thing is to acknowledge it in oneself. If one can at least say to oneself, you know what, I did wrong. That was bad, and I can't do that again. And how I make amends is how I make amends. But it's that looking at yourself in the mirror and taking accountability for your actions that, of course, begins the process of healing. And just think about it, if everybody did that, if everybody took account of what they'd done and felt that that was something that needed to be righted, what a different kind of race we would be, a different kind of humanity we would be. So I think accountability and atonement are good words to bear in mind as we go forward into 2026. And certainly, in reference to a lot of things I've been talking about on this particular video, there's a lot to take away. In fact, I haven't said this before, but I do think, as I've gone through everything I wanted to talk about, I think a lot of things might be interesting for other people who, let's say, don't know me very well or haven't necessarily framed things in this way. It might be good to share this video because it gets us thinking about things in a way that help us manage this very, very choppy time that humanity is going through. Anyway, that's it. We're done for now. And I look forward to seeing you the next time in, well, maybe 10 days or so. Bye for now.